For a large portion of its history, Platinum Games' name was practically synonymous with action games. By 2013, just 5 years after the studio was founded, it had released several critically acclaimed action games, such as Mad World, Vanquish, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, and Bayonetta. But more recently, Platinum Games has been dabbling in other genres as well, even if the gameplay is still action-oriented. While it would have been viewed as strange just a few years ago, in 2021, Platinum Games developing an RPG, especially one with a sci-fi setting, is not only normal but highly anticipated. If you were to ask most people what Platinum Games' first RPG was, they will probably answer with Nier Automata or Astral Chain. While they'd be incorrect, it's understandable that they wouldn't know very much about a game that came out more than a console generation ago and didn't sell very well. The Japanese studio's first RPG, which also featured a sci-fi setting, came out 10 years before Astral Chain was released on the Nintendo Switch, and it wasn't released on the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, PC, or Wii, but the Nintendo DS. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at Platinum Games' handheld space opera. Our story starts with a game development studio by the name of Human Entertainment. Founded in 1983, the Japanese studio was known for creating the Clock Tower, Fire Pro Wrestling, and Twilight Syndrome franchises, and developed games for a large number of platforms, including consoles, handhelds, and PCs. Unfortunately, by the turn of the millennium, the company had fallen on hard times. By 1999, the company had started to pull out of game expos, and it had accrued nearly 4 billion yen in debt, which was about $3.5 million US at the time. In November, Human Entertainment tried working with the Hachioji branch of the Tokyo District Court in order to restructure its debt, but it didn't work out. And in January of the following year, it filed for bankruptcy. If that wasn't bad enough, the company was in the middle of developing a brand new game for a brand new platform. Human Entertainment was collaborating with Capcom Production Studio 4 to create Steel Battalion, which would eventually release on Microsoft's debut console, the Xbox. The game's director was Human Entertainment's Hifumi Kono, and it was produced by Capcom's Atsushi Inaba. Shinji Mikami, of Resident Evil and Dino Crisis fame, also served as a producer for Capcom. Once Human Entertainment shut its doors, several of its developers decided to create their own studios instead of looking for work elsewhere. Some of those developers formed Sandlot and Spike, which would eventually become Spike Chunsoft. However, Hifumi Kono decided to start his own studio, and with the help of other former Human Entertainment developers, founded NudeMaker in Shinjuku, Tokyo. Since Hifumi's team at NudeMaker had already been working on Steel Battalion, they continued developing the game with Capcom until it was released in 2002. While part of the studio worked on Shin Mikagura Shoujo Tantiiden, an arrogate finale to the Mikagura Shoujo Tantiiden trilogy, which was originally created by Human Entertainment, was released in 2003. Hifumi Kono once again teamed up with Atsushi Inaba, Shinji Mikami, and Capcom Production Studio 4. This time, they would be working on a sequel to Steel Battalion, titled Steel Battalion Line of Contact, which would give players another reason to use their 40-button controller. After Line of Contact was released in early 2004, Atsushi Inaba and Shinji Mikami wanted to focus on making creative, original games. In an interview with Gamasutra, Inaba outlined his plans to create a studio within Capcom. After I left the Resident Evil 4 Devil May Cry team, I became a producer at Capcom. The stuff I was doing was pretty original and had lots of creativity to it, so I thought maybe it should be differentiated from the company. So Shinji Mikami and I had an idea to set up a brand where it would be clear that these were to be the original games. So Capcom would make their games, and we would be within Capcom, but we would be making our games. So the idea to set up a company within the company for original games came in around 2002. Even though it took 2 years, on March 30, 2004, Capcom decided to rebrand their Studio 9 Research and Development, or R&D, division into Clover Studio. This was a part of Capcom's larger R&D restructuring efforts at the time, and in their 2004 annual report, Kenzo Sugimoto, Capcom's president and CEO at the time, stated that, in order to create new genres and original titles, we have spun off a part of the R&D department and established Clover Studio Company Limited. The name for the studio actually came from Atsushi Inaba and Shinji Mikami. Well, we thought pretty hard about it, and it comes from Mikami's name in mind. It takes the mi from his name, meaning 3, and the ba from my name, meaning leaf. Put those together and it's 3 leaves. So even though the logo is a 4-leaf clover, the idea actually comes from what plant would have 3 leaves. Despite only being officially established in July of 2004, it didn't take long for the newly minted studio to start releasing games. After they finished the PlayStation 2 port of Viewtiful Joe, which Atsushi Inaba and Capcom Production Studio 4 had released on the GameCube last year, they completed Viewtiful Joe 2. Viewtiful Joe 2, or Viewtiful Joe 2 Secret of the Black Film in Japan, was released for both PlayStation 2 and GameCube by the end of 2004. The studio continued working on Viewtiful Joe games in 2005, releasing Viewtiful Joe Red Hot Rumble on the GameCube and PSP, and Viewtiful Joe Double Trouble on the Nintendo DS. – 2006 was a very important year for the new studio. For the first time, they would have the opportunity to showcase their own games, instead of working on sequels for existing franchises. They didn't waste this opportunity and released 2 original games, On April 20, 2006, they released Okami, and on September 14th, they released God Hand. Okami was a critical darling, and received numerous awards from almost as many publications and organizations. God Hand wasn't so fortunate. Its reception was mixed, and while it received praise for its combat system, many critics took issue with everything from its humor to its graphics. Okay, so one smashing success and one game that critics had mixed feelings on. All things considered, that's actually a really good start. Most studios will never make a game that's received as well as Okami was, and that was Clover Studio's first original game, which, if you recall, was the entire reason that the studio was formed in the first place, which is what made what happened next so surprising to fans of the studio's work. Less than a week after God Hand hit store shelves in North America on October 10, 2006, it was announced that the studio that created it would close. On October 12, 2006, Capcom's board of directors voted to dissolve Clover Studio. As for the reason for this dissolution, Capcom's press release said, Clover Studio Company Limited has met the goal of developing unique and creative original home video software. However, in view of promoting a business strategy that concentrates management resources on a selected business to enhance the efficiency of the development power of the entire Capcom group, the dissolution of Clover Studio Company Limited has been raised and passed at a board of directors meeting. Understandably, some people blame the studio's closure on poor sales numbers. For evidence, they may have pointed to a one-up interview with Inaba that was released on August 16, 2006. In it, he mentioned that there were people at the company, including the game's director, Hideki Kamiya, who were disappointed at Okami's sales numbers. A lot of the staff, the director Kamiya included, were a little down about the numbers. They were expecting it to do more than it did. They were hoping for it to do a lot better than it did. When they began Okami, it was the first huge game they were making, so they lost a lot of time and the efficiency wasn't as good as it could have been, so they've learned a lot of valuable lessons about it. However, in Capcom's 2006 first quarter financial results, which was released on August 10th and covers results obtained between April 1st, 2006 and June 30th, 2006, stated that the new and innovative software Okami for the PlayStation 2 that embraced Japanese tradition performed strongly, and that strong performance continued into the new year. In the 2007 annual report, they said, the innovative new software Okami for the PlayStation 2 also experienced healthy growth, and that Okami for the PlayStation 2 made a strong showing in the Japanese market. So even if it didn't sell as much as some wanted it to, it appears to have sold well enough. But that's just one game. The vast majority of Clover Studio's output was centered around the Viewtiful Joe franchise, a franchise that wasn't exactly known for record-breaking sales numbers. However, not every game at Clover Studio was created with the sole purpose of producing a commercial hit, especially creative projects that may have had a more niche audience. At GDC 2005, Atsushi Inaba laid out 3 beneficial project types: product-focused, brand-focused, and staff-focused. Staff-focused projects are centered around the development of a studio's staff, allowing them to work together on a creative project in order to learn, and the entire Viewtiful Joe series was a gigantic staff project. One of his primary objectives was to develop a talented director named Hideki Kamiya. Even though he had already directed 2 successful games in Devil May Cry and Resident Evil 2, those were the only 2 games that he had ever directed.
The Viewtiful Joe series and its derivatives could be made at lower cost. We could nurture or train the director, and also we could achieve to make lower cost product. We won in this game. Maybe we couldn't sell a lot of titles, but still I think it turned out to be a very fortunate game.
The last game on the list is God Hand, which anecdotally seems to have a reputation for selling abysmally. However, in an interview with Wired at the 2006 Tokyo Game Show, Inaba says that the game sold well above his expectations. We shipped out 60,000 units and sold nearly that. It was a lot more than I originally thought. In fact, since the game was aimed primarily at hardcore users, I thought we'd sell only maybe 20,000 or 30,000, but we sold twice that. So at the time, Okami appeared to be at least moderately successful commercially. Viewtiful Joe was never intended to be commercially successful, and God Hand appears to have performed better than expected. So why would Capcom shutter a studio with so much potential? Let's take another look at the GDC talk that Inaba gave in 2005. I imagine that a lot of what he said wasn't too appealing to Capcom shareholders. Charles Belfield, Capcom's vice president of marketing, explained Capcom's structure, why Clover Studio was different, and why it was closed in an interview with Gamasutra. Capcom, unlike most other developers, doesn't have dedicated strict boundaries between each of its development teams. We actually have one pool of development talent at Capcom, and those individuals are basically assigned based on the timescales of each project we're working on. So everybody does work on a variety of content and games at Capcom, with the exception of Clover, where we did create a separate entity. Our games need to at least break even and add value to our shareholders, so it's impossible to make games that are not profitable over and over again. This is something that Inaba was clearly aware of, and it caused him to think about his future at Clover and Capcom. In the last official PlayStation Magazine issue that was released before his studio's closure, he gave the magazine's readers a glimpse of what was to come. The thing we do have to worry about, obviously, from Capcom's perspective: do we need Clover? Or can Clover afford to keep making games that don't sell? And things like that. But if Capcom had the right to say things like that to us, then we wouldn't really need to exist as Clover. However, while they definitely played a large role in the studio's closure, there appeared to be more going on than just poor sales numbers. Going back to October 12, 2006, there were people who suspected the same thing. Brandon of InsertCredit.com reported that at that year's Tokyo Game Show, which took place between September 22nd and September 24th, people said that Inaba was leaving Capcom to form his own studio. Wired's Chris Kohler provided a similar update. A source who wishes to remain anonymous is telling me that the Clover gang actually wants to split from Capcom and form their own independent development studio. So the dissolution then would have been caused by the developers deciding to take off. Later in the day, NextGen.biz received a Q&A from Capcom, which shed some more light on the situation. According to the Q&A, Atsushi Inaba and Hideki Kamiya had both left the company. Mr. Inaba and Mr. Kamiya have also left Capcom in June and July of this year respectively. Naturally, we had hoped that Mr. Inaba and Mr. Kamiya to come back to us. However, both of them told us that they wanted a new challenge at a new environment. As far as Capcom's concerned, now all the resources should be used more effectively and more efficiently since they are centralized. Interestingly, Shinji Mikami had left the company more than a year ago, in November 2005, but had been working with them under a separate contract. Obviously, the details of that contract weren't disclosed, as he appeared to be completely separated from Capcom at the time of this announcement. He had created his own studio, Straight Story, after Clover's closure, but he didn't sever ties with his former colleagues and would be working with them again in the near future. Their next response also detailed the current state of Clover Studio, which had only 15 people on staff on October 12th. This is down significantly from the 64 people that they apparently employed at the studio's founding, and the 80 people that they had on staff before it was broken up. A quick aside, this Q&A was eventually removed at Capcom's request. According to NextGen.biz, this is because the Q&A was incomplete, and it was never intended to be shared outside of the company. The Q&A confirmed the rumors that had been floating around since the Tokyo Game Show, that Inaba and Kamiya had decided to leave Clover and start their own studio. And they didn't waste any time doing it. 1 month after they had both left the company, on August 1st, 2006, they, along with Mikami, founded Seeds and named Atsushi Inaba as the company's representative. So, 2 months before Capcom announced that Clover Studios was being dissolved, the 3 most important people at the studio had not only already left, but had started their own company. Shinji Mikami and his new studio would work with Seeds in order to publish their games. Despite being a contract employee, he was brought on as an external board member. Clover's closing and the departure of its 3 most prominent figures was the latest in a line of talented developers who decided to leave Capcom, like Yoshiki Okamoto. Inaba discussed this in an interview with 1UP, but like me and Okamoto, there are a few people that just cannot fit in that corporate society. We just jump out from the society. I'm one of the people who got out from Capcom, so I can only talk from my side. But from my perspective, if you want to move on with your own style, it just gets difficult to do that in a big company. And even if you become the top executive in a big company, the question is, will you be able to do what you want? And the answer is probably no. So that's why I had to get out of the big society and do my own thing. And that was probably the same with the other people too. While Inaba had big plans for the studio, despite all of their experience, they still ran into issues. One of those being recruiting talent. The biggest thing was staff, like gathering people, because when we were based within Capcom, if we needed more people, it was easy to get them. And these days, it's not like it only takes 10 people, 20 people to make a game. You need hundreds of people to create a game. So it's difficult to gather all those people because we have to individually recruit them. Because of this, the responsibility that each person carries in this company is becoming much bigger than what it used to be. While they had always intended to be an independent studio, if they found a publisher that they got along with, they'd be willing to work with them long term. But they didn't want to focus all of their attention on just one project. They wanted to be working on several projects at once. My opinion hasn't changed. As before, I don't want to concentrate on just one title and develop it for years. Because if we do that, of course people will start worrying like, oh, what are they doing? And also, as a company, just working on one title is not good. I don't want to have smaller groups or just have a small studio working on smaller titles. Of course, I want to emphasize our existence to everybody too. So what I'm thinking about now is, of course, that it's going to be hard to create 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 huge titles at once because I need a lot of staff to create games. So what I have in mind right now is maybe to create 2 or 3 game titles at one time. This is because I have so many things that I want to do. I have a lot of ideas in my mind, so I don't want to just concentrate on one. From the beginning, this company wanted to be known for its gameplay. That's where they wanted to stand out. There are tons of companies that create games all around the world, but there are only a few studios that are considered high qualified studios, and we want to become one of them. Not for the beautiful graphics or the visuals, but for the gameplay, the fun gameplay. And these days there are a few games where you feel like the gameplay is fun. There are a lot of beautiful games, but looking for games that are actually fun is getting difficult. So I want our studio to be one of the studios that actually creates fun games. And I don't necessarily care if the game industry thinks so, but I want the users to think like that. I want them to think, okay, if it's created by Seeds, this is going to be a fun game. I want the users to think like that. Also, if you weren't a big fan of the studio's name, don't worry. They were never going to release a game under the name Seeds. We're not going to put out games under the name of Seeds though. Seeds is more like a temporary name right now. So when we decide where we're going and when we decide which path to go to and all that, we're going to dramatically change the names and everything. Like totally change it. We're not going to put out games as Seeds. This new studio was revealed to the world on February 2007, after their website was made public, and as of January, it had grown to 51 employees. Clover Studio officially closed on March 15, 2007, and its remains were absorbed under another Capcom studio, Flagship. In October, the company announced it would be merging with Odd Incorporated, a company founded in 2006 by another ex-Capcom employee, Tatsuya Minami, and Kenichi Sato, to form PlatinumGames. As to why they decided on this particular name, PlatinumGames seeks to provide gamers worldwide with games of the highest quality. We aim to exceed expectations, to surprise and delight our fans. This drive guides us as we create our products, and we chose our company name as a constant reminder of our goals. Platinum, renowned for its high quality, is a metal that keeps its luster forever. During the fall of Clover and the rise of PlatinumGames, NudeMaker was living up to their name. The only game that they'd released since Steel Battalion Line of Contact was AV King, or Adult Video King, on January 27, 2006 for the PC. This comedic arrogant game was about two people who were selling adult videos in order to pay off their debt to the Yakuza. But they weren't the only studio to go radio silent. After reforming as PlatinumGames, no one had heard anything about what the studio was working on. Then, on May 15, 2008, PlatinumGames and SEGA announced that they would be working together to release 4 original games. SEGA of America Incorporated and SEGA Europe Limited today announced a worldwide partnership with PlatinumGames Incorporated, the development studio recently formed by the team behind some of the most successful franchises in the video game industry. Under the agreement, PlatinumGames would develop 3 groundbreaking new SEGA titles: Mad World, Infinite Line, and Bayonetta, covering a variety of game genres with innovative design concepts that explore the depths of today's best-selling platforms. A soon-to-be-announced 4th title, being directed by the legendary gaming icon Shinji Mikami, is also a part of the agreement. If you're curious, the yet-to-be-announced 4th game would eventually become Vanquish. Along with the press release, SEGA revealed several details about each game, including Infinite Line, which is the only game that was going to be released on a handheld console. This sci-fi RPG was going to be a Nintendo DS exclusive, and was scheduled to be released in 2009. In the game, you'd be able to customize over 150 ships and interact with more than 200 characters while exploring the vastness of space. They also made it perfectly clear that the title Infinite Line wasn't set in stone. Shortly after this news broke, Famitsu published an interview with PlatinumGames about their new partnership. This interview not only reveals why they decided to partner with SEGA, but it may also give us some more insight into why they decided to leave Capcom. Tatsuya Minami, the studio's president and CEO, cited the ability to focus on creating new things as a large contributing factor in the partnership with SEGA. Looking at the current game industry, there are a lot of sequels, and many publishers want these. If we were to make sequels, we wouldn't have left our previous company. We just wanted to make original titles, and SEGA was the best for realizing that desire. We previously worked in-house as a publisher, but now we are an independent development studio. In other words, our #1 mission is to create software of high quality. Delivering this game to players and selling it is SEGA's job. According to Minami, SEGA was giving PlatinumGames full creative control. While they'd offer suggestions as to what should be in the game in order to sell more copies, the studio had the power to accept or reject them. During the course of its announcement, it was also revealed that PlatinumGames would be teaming up with Hifumi Kono and NudeMaker on Infinite Line. Atsushi Inaba had been wanting to make another game with Kono for a while, but never ended up working out. But after they had secured the partnership with SEGA, he reached out to NudeMaker in order to create something unique. Mr. Kono and I had originally worked on Steel Battalion together, and since then, I'd always wanted to work with him again, but it has unfortunately been difficult to materialize. Therefore, I approached Mr. Kono about this collaboration with the hope that we would be able to add a different flavor to the current PlatinumGames lineup. With Kono on board, they started developing initial concepts for their collaborative project. The initial project focused on the ship customization aspect when I and Kono-san first started to talk about it. We thought about making it a game for adults who have childhood memories of playing with these types of toys, and thought it would be fun if somehow we could make that happen. After that initial discussion, we not only prepared the idea of ship modifications, but also included vast stages and a complex story on which it allowed users to play with these toys to the fullest capacity, thus forming the game into the current sci-fi RPG we have today. Although PlatinumGames is strong in creating action games, I was fully supportive of this project, and thought it offered a rather interesting challenge for us to create quite a different genre while collaborating with another company. The initial concept of Infinite Line was actually created before the deal with SEGA was finalized in a conversation between Inaba and Kono. Their inspiration for the project came from their mutual appreciation of the sci-fi genre. While Kono was in his early teenage years, sci-fi was very popular, so he naturally picked up an affinity for it. Some of his primary influences were Star Trek, Childhood's End by A.C. Clarke, Hayuku Oko no Hiro to Sunoku no Yuro, or 10 Billion Days and 1 Billion Nights by Ryu Mitsuse, Captain Harlock, Space Runaway Ideon, Battlestar Galactica, Spaceship Battle Yamato, various works from the Australian science fiction novelist Greg Egan, and Yoshiyuki Tomino. He was also influenced by H.P. Lovecraft because I think you can see the roots of the contrast between the unfathomable infiniteness of space and the finite, small nothingness of humanity that Lovecraft supposed in all of my works. Inaba's primary inspirations were Hotel, a one-shot manga written by Boichi, The Long Afternoon Earth by Brian Aldiss, the Planetes manga, and Aliens. While PlatinumGames would be handling the game's production duties, NudeMaker would be responsible for the game's development. This would be challenging for the 9-person studio, but they would try to make up for the lack of numbers by working both smarter and harder. We have invested a lot in tools, such as our unique scenario tool that supports development by a small team. However, I believe that above all else, it was our tenacity that supported this title. Everyone, including new graduates who had just joined our company, understood the value and meaning of creating the title and willingly sacrificed their health and time for that cause. When that wasn't enough, they would outsource some of the work to external studios. At NudeMaker, we make the early assets for everything, the character designs, spaceship designs, and then we show that to external companies that are working with us and ask them to work along those lines. At some point during the production process, they had to decide which platform or platforms they were going to develop the game for. PlatinumGames had expressed interest in developing games for Nintendo's two newest consoles from the beginning, but they didn't want to pull resources away from teams working on more powerful hardware. Of course, the Wii and DS are attractive platforms. They're platforms that aren't competing by way of the graphics. It's more about the gameplay. Of course, we do want to create games on the Wii and DS, but we have staff that has been creating games on the newest technology, like the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, so we are not interested in cutting that out, because if we do that, that's going to cut out one of the flavors available to us. With NudeMaker overseeing the game's development, they didn't have to worry about pulling developers off of existing projects. And once Kono saw the game's budget, the decision to make a game for the DS was an easy one. When I was presented with the development budget for this project, it was not enough for a console platform, but fairly large for a handheld platform. I determined that in order to develop this as a console game, we would have to remove many features from the original concept, which I wanted to avoid. Therefore, I chose a Nintendo DS platform instead, in order to establish the epic grandeur of the title. As a result, I was able to pack in everything regarding the story from my original concept to this tiny hardware. Inibo agreed, although he looked at things from the perspective of a producer. We estimated that developing this game on other consoles would involve a huge risk because of the amount of large-scale customization and story we hope to achieve. I concluded that no matter how we put it together, we could not accomplish the initial plan because of the development costs and the time constraints, and as such, there would be no way of making it. I made the final decision as a producer of the game to develop for the DS. The game's visuals would be a mix between 3D models, 2D character portraits, and anime stills. The first thing that NudeMaker developed for the game were the character images, and they branched off from there. The character graphics were the first thing that came out of our production line. Once we had those, we wanted to do our best to express the special touches the graphic designers had included, and we decided the best way of doing so would be via dot-like graphics with gradation. Finally, the decision to do the cutscenes with anime stills was something born out of schedule and production constraints. Tatsuro Iwamoto and Sawaki Takayasu, who both worked on Okami at Clover Studio, worked as character designers. There were also a large number of people who contributed to the project by designing ships for their game's various factions. The game's story was being personally handled by Hifumi Kono. It could be divided into 4 parts, but with 2 distinct halves that would each tell a different type of story. The first half would focus on the adventure of exploring space, while the second would be more serious. Kono explained the reason for this division in an interview with Silicon Era. I wanted players to feel the excitement of going out into outer space for the first time, and having their own spacecraft which becomes bigger and more powerful gradually. I naturally thought the main character would be a boy who has no experience in outer space. On the other hand, I also thought that I should offer the excitement of fighting hard battles as you command a big fleet. It would be a little unrealistic if we had the boy commanding a big fleet, so we divided the story in 2 in order to resolve the contradiction. In addition to all of this, I made the first half of the game very personal, while the second half of the story is much larger and focuses less on individuals as it does themes. Kono used the game's first half and its main character Yuri to pull people into the game's world, and during this process, he grew more attached to Yuri himself. In general, if you start off with some big story about the whole universe, it's going to be hard for people to get really into it. So I started with Yuri, the main character. He's someone I grew more and more attached to as I wrote the story, and followed how he got out into space, and how he grew into a spacefaring man. And here's how Kono described the game's concept, story, and main themes. This game is all about venturing into the vast universe by captaining your own fleet of customized spaceships. There are a variety of ships to choose from, which you can then build on with a huge selection of available ship parts. As captain, you will be responsible for assigning roles to your crewmen and keeping them content. As the game progresses, you'll be able to add up to 4 additional ships to your fleet, and create your own battle formations and strategies. The major theme of the story is the human quest to understand the reason for existence within the universe, as well as this with the setting of space. Adventure and exploration are also important themes. Within the game, the player will take on the role of Yuri, the son of a famous space adventurer, in search of the mystical epitaph, which is believed to be the key to saving the universe. The adventure is full of surprises and is productive for young Yuri through various conflicts and hurdles, but glorious young days do not last long. The last half of the story mainly shows Yuri's sufferings and struggles. The story would advance once the player had reached a certain location, such as a specific planet or a location on that planet, like a tavern. In addition to the main quest, there would be optional side activities that the player can engage in that would have an effect on the main quest. The main story and side quests would have to do most of the heavy lifting when it came to world building though. Kono made the creative decision to create a large universe with lots of planets to interact with, instead of creating a smaller universe with more detailed planets. Even though he had several sources of inspiration, creating a large, interesting world for players isn't easy. One of the reasons for this was his desire to create a large universe that wasn't centered on our solar system. One of the core ideas was to portray a huge universe. There are a lot of stories out there that are set inside the solar system when you're trying to create your world, It's easier in some respects if you focus on the solar system. Many stories are based on current, very realistic technology, or you can bump it up a little bit to near future technology, which is pretty easy to do. It's a lot more work to portray a vast area of space, but that's what I really wanted to do. When we were young, science fiction was all about exploring the vast expanses of space, hopping all over the galaxy. If there are any gamers out there who haven't really experienced that before, we wanted to show them what it would be like. Because of the trouble he was having writing the game's story, Kono assigned some of the character designs for the minor characters to his artists, but to his surprise, some of the characters were way better than he expected. I had my assistant place a good number of design orders for bit parts, but the designs for these minor characters were better than I had imagined, so I decided to change the characters' personalities and their roles based on the designs. Besides the organization they belonged to, most of the minor characters underwent changes. Characters subjected to such changes were, for example, Terzi, Formich, and Thomas. Thomas had the initial impression of a true bit part, but despite how he was initially written, Thomas ended up playing a much larger role in the game's story. Fortunately for Kono, despite his struggles, he was able to finish the main plot near the beginning of the game's development. That allowed him to place interesting items and characters at pivotal points in the story, and made foreshadowing easier. As for how you'd interact with those characters, there are some characters that you meet that become your allies as a part of the game's story, but there are plenty of other characters that the player has a chance to actively recruit. These crew characters have their own personalities and backgrounds, and they can play an important role in the game's storyline. One of the interesting things for the players to discover then is the degree of impact having certain members in the crew, or not in the crew, will have. Infinite Lion's gameplay revolved around its unique battle system, ship customization, and crew management. The game's battle system would take advantage of the DS's touchscreen, which would allow the player to select commands for the ship or ships to follow. Your basic combat commands are for full volley attacks, barrage, normal attacks, and evasive maneuvers, dodge. Each command you issue has an associated command cost. That cost comes out of the command gauge. The speed at which the command gauge accumulates depends on the ship's captain, crew quality, and what modules and equipment are installed on the ship. These three basic commands would function kind of like rock, paper, scissors. Barrage attacks would be powerful, but you'd have a difficult time hitting an opponent who dodged. And while normal attacks were weaker than a barrage, you'd receive an accuracy bonus against a dodging opponent. This simple system was critical to realizing some of the game's design goals. For the battle system, we started off wanting to make it something that was somewhat simple, and it was only after that we arrived at the rock, paper, scissors approach. If we would have made a complex system that was more about rewarding player technique, I feel it would have distracted from the customization elements of the game. By selecting a rock, paper, scissors system with a minimum of elements, I wanted to defend the core game mechanic of increasing the power of your ship via customization as a surefire path to success. I was afraid that we would lose more casual gamers, depending on the complexity of the customization system, but watering down our core concept, that of customizing a battleship, was never an option. And while this battle system was unique, it would still feature elements that you'd expect from a traditional RPG, like random encounters and earning money and experience from battle. And that money could go a long way if it was used effectively. As Kono just mentioned, ship customization would be critical to success in battle. There would be three primary ways of increasing the stats of your fleet: buying new ships, upgrading existing ships, and finding competent crew members and assigning them to roles that suit their stats and skills. While the battles in the story would take place on a much larger scale, players would only be able to control 5 ships at a time in their fleet, with any additional ships being kept in reserve. There would be different types of ships with different characteristics, and they would have an effect on how your fleet fared in battle. For example, if all you put out are heavy battleships, you will have a high degree of firepower, but your command gauge will build more slowly. Conversely, if you have ships designed for more tactical fire, you can back off while your command gauge is low and issue other commands to gain an advantage in battle. Ships could be customized by using modules. Each ship would have a set number of customizable squares where players could drag and drop these modules to increase their ship's stats. You could adjust your ship's speed, increase its firepower, make it more comfortable for your crew members, and much more. Designing the modules was difficult for NudeMaker, and unfortunately, there were some things that either didn't make it into the final game or weren't as fleshed out as Kono wanted them to be. It was tough to set up each ship and module because of a major goal we had established in the beginning. However, we had a system concept which allowed players to customize and make their own original ship. It was unavoidable work. I slightly regret that I could not complete a huge number of parameter settings to my full satisfaction. There are still some parameters which I wanted to set up with strengthening their features. The game's crew system not only added additional customization elements, but was a way to make the experience of commanding a fleet of spaceships different than controlling tanks or planes. I believe the attraction of a ship is very different from the attraction of a tank, warplane, and other weapons. It needs a lot of crew for operation, and it also functions as the crew's home. Because of that, the crew system seemed more of a necessity as opposed to an idea that we had just come up with. In the system, operators' abilities affect the execution speed of commands. The fire crew control the accuracy rate of weapons, the navigation crew helps the dodging rate of attacks, and the engine crew helps the speed of the ship. There are also security crews who become the main force in melee battles, personnel in the sickbay who maintain the crew's physical condition, and crews who serve in the mess hall. If you haven't noticed, a large number of people who were working on Infinite Line had worked together before, and that trend continues with the game's soundtrack. One of the game's primary composers was Masafumi Takada, one of Hifumi Kono's best friends, along with Goichi Suda, or Suda 51. Suda51 founded Grasshopper Manufacture, a game development studio, in 1998 after leaving Human Entertainment. Not only was Masafumi Takada working at Grasshopper at the time, but he, along with the game's other composer Jun Fukuda, both worked with Kono on another sci-fi game. I have asked the two of them to work with me on titles many times before, including Steel Battalion, and to me, they are the two composers I trust more than any others. I asked them to come up with tracks that really express the expansive nature of space, and it seems it was quite a difficult task to express this concept while using the limited sound capabilities of the DS. As with any game, there are features that developers wanted to include, but had to be removed for various reasons. One of the features that the studio was asked about the most was multiplayer. While the studio had discussed this feature internally, they determined that it wouldn't work within the development process. We looked into including Wi-Fi play very early on in development. However, when you think of the game's overall scope, as well as the size of the production team on the title, we identified Wi-Fi play as a very risky element that could cause production problems towards the end of development, so the idea was set aside. Personally, I think that if Wi-Fi play was included, you would have to move forward with an initial game design that had that idea as a prerequisite, or you would end up with a compromised design. It'd be weird to say that this next proposed element was removed because it was never given a chance to develop into anything more than an idea. Inspired by their previous work together, Kono suggested creating a Steel Battalion-like controller for the game, but Inaba wasn't having it. I tried to propose that at an actual meeting. PlatinumGames' Inaba-san shot that down pretty quickly and forcibly. Our base concept for this game is to apply to a much wider audience than that of Steel Battalion, and so we unfortunately couldn't do anything that would limit that user base we were aiming for. On July 15, 2008, the game's name was changed from Infinite Line to Infinite Space, but that would be the biggest news story about the game for a while, other than an appearance at that year's Tokyo Game Show and the announcement of a short anime promotional film. The next announcement wouldn't come until March 30, 2009, when its Japanese release date of June 11th was revealed. Infinite Space, which was titled Mugen Kuro in Japan, appeared to nail its debut performance. It was met with favorable reviews from Famitsu, whose 4 reviewers all rated it highly. It was given 2 9s and 2 8s for a final score of 34 out of 40. The game was praised for its ship customization and its narrative. The gameplay was also praised for being challenging and having an easily understandable interface. They started working on the Western version of the game shortly after its Japanese release, and in July 2009, it was given a release window of spring 2010. As the new year arrived, so did new sets of release dates. First, on February 17, 2010, it was announced that Infinite Space would be released in Europe on March 26th. The next week, on February 24th, SEGA announced it would be released on March 16th in North America. When the game hit store shelves in North America, its initial reception wasn't as warm as it appeared to be in Japan. It received generally favorable reviews from critics, holding a 75 out of 100 on review aggregator Metacritic, but there was a fair amount of criticism leveled at the game, even from those who enjoyed their time with it. While it was praised for its story, shipbuilding, and the amount of content that it provided, people were less happy with its battle mechanics, lackluster tutorial, and general clunkiness. The game's difficulty received a more mixed reception, with some enjoying the game's learning curve much more than others. It was the clunkiness that seemed to bother people the most though. IGN's Damon Hatfield, who had been covering the game since it was announced, expressed his frustrations with the game in his review. The interface isn't intuitive and at times can be downright unfair to the player. For instance, sometimes you have to talk to characters multiple times in a row to get all their information. Not sure what you're supposed to do next? Well, that's because you didn't choose to talk to a character a second time on that last planet. What sense does that make? The game was also criticized for its lack of a quest log, giving the player poor directions, and not doing a good job of informing the player of what all the stats that they were upgrading actually do. Some of the information that you want is there, but you'll have to dig through the help menu to find it. For everything else, you're on your own. And even if the story was generally well received, some people weren't totally satisfied with the way that it ended. However, despite all of the issues that people had with it, Infinite Space's reception was still mostly positive. Its story, characters, customization, uniqueness, and, for some, difficulty were enough to compensate for its shortcomings. The last line of Brad Hildebrand's review of the game for Worth Playing is a good summary for the general critical consensus. If you're willing to stick it out, you'll find a well-plotted space opera and a very cool shipbuilding system, but getting to that point will be tough for many. While there's a good deal to love about Infinite Space, there are an equal number of things to hate about it as well. But all of the game's flaws presented the developers with the chance to make an even better follow-up, and people were interested in seeing a direct sequel, or a similar game that was more polished. And fans weren't alone. Ifumi Kono also wanted to expand the world of Infinite Space, although in a different form. I have an ambition to expand the world into another medium if given a chance, but we'll see. I'm not a decision maker. As far as sales were concerned, things started off pretty well. Jumping back a year to its release in Japan, Infinite Space debuted at #1 on the Media Create sales chart, selling 38,000 units between its release date, June 11th, and the end of the reporting week, June 14th. While that number itself wasn't particularly impressive, the demand for the game appeared to be there, since Media Create reported that it had a 92% sell-through rate. So, assuming that it could put enough cards on the shelves, sales might improve over time. Unfortunately, sales started to slow. On June 28th, it had sold 48,397 total units. It made its final appearance on the top 10 software charts in July. selling only 56,000 units as of July 5th, and it didn't fare much better overseas, as it sold less than 200,000 units worldwide. Despite numerous potential reasons behind the game's poor sales figures, from it being a new IP to receiving less than stellar reviews, there was something else that happened that may have hurt their sales numbers, and it wasn't something that NudeMaker or PlatinumGames had control over. Remember how, despite only selling 38,000 units, the game achieved a 92% sell-through rate? This was because SEGA didn't ship out enough cartridges to retailers in Japan, so many of them actually sold out. According to Atsushi Inaba, the biggest problem with Infinite Space was when SEGA undershipped the game and it sold out instantly. We lost the chance for a bunch of sales. He explained the situation in greater detail in an interview with Cubed. I think it was a really sad situation. Clearly it was a missed opportunity. Cartridges and cartridge production carry an inventory risk that is higher than that of a DVD, so it is quite difficult to decide how many should be included in the first production run. However, when the game was released, even though there was really nothing else like it in the Japanese market, and the game was anticipated by Japanese users, it was decided to take the path of least risk, which you can now say was a mistake. PlatinumGames didn't have the final say on the initial production run numbers, and it aided me with this one. I think the word lost is a good way of putting it. However, even though the sales numbers weren't very good, that wasn't the biggest contributing factor to Infinite Space's commercial failure. While he said that, and it certainly didn't help, he was kind of joking around. He later clarified that the game crumbled under its own ambitions. By adding more to the game, they increased the cost of development by constantly pushing their schedule. Honestly, the reason that Infinite Space failed, it's not right to say that it failed, because from another angle, this is actually its greatest success. During production, the scenario kept getting bigger and bigger, and so the ROM size started getting bigger, and the schedule got stretched as we added more and more. But in the end, that's what people loved about the game. So it's difficult to separate the success and failure of that title, because they're one and the same thing. NudeMaker is still around, but they haven't released the game since 2016. And PlatinumGames is more popular than ever, having released all the games that I mentioned at the beginning of this video and more. As for Infinite Space, it's curious. It was associated with a high-profile developer and was distributed by SEGA. It received lots of coverage when it was announced, and it was reviewed by most of the popular gaming websites, but it still didn't sell very well. It's a game that was unique and had elements that people really liked, but it also had several problems that some people couldn't overlook. It seems to have all but one of the elements of a cult classic, the cult, which is probably to be expected for a game that sold less than 200,000 copies, is more than a decade old, and is kind of hard to play on original hardware. But if you were to go out seeking opinions on the game from those who played it, you'd probably be met with positive reviews. And while the chances are probably pretty close to zero, if SEGA ever decides to revive the IP, Hifumi Kono probably wouldn't be too hard to find.